Is Nations League good for CONCACAF? Now, we're just jumping right into this, by the way. Side note, trying to reach 1,000 subscribers. So if you haven't already, give us a subscribe. African, Canadian content. I really got it. Anyways, on to the topic. Is Nations League good for the women for CONCACAF? Well, first of all, it's kind of already here. If you look at how the draw works. Now, let's make sure we qualify a few things. First thing we're talking about Nations League on the women's side. And it is essentially already here, especially in regards to the women. So CONCACAF put into place Nations League style qualifiers. We had qualifiers for the Olympics and World Cup were similar to how the men did it with pre-groups and already seeded teams. And then the Nations League is going to go, their version of it is going to go for Gold Cup qualifying. The Women's Gold Cup is coming in 2024, I believe. So that is going to be actually a very interesting tournament to have. It's good to have it back. Outside of that, we don't really have a continental championship other than the CONCACAF W. So Women's Gold Cup will be really fun. But we're really talking about this mainly because UEFA just announced they're going to try to start Nations League for their teams. And what that does is it does limit the friendly pool that you have. If UEFA follows through with this, what this does is it does severely limit the amount of teams that are available. If you look at the top 40 FIFA ranked teams on the women's side, 24 of them are from Europe. The highest ranked being 24 being from Europe. The highest on the European team ranked team, I don't know why I said it that way, that's a mouthful. The highest ranked team that is not from UEFA is the US, then Canada, followed by Brazil, and then you get to the Asian countries. So does Nations League as a format work for Canada? I'd say you should look at it from a CONCACAF standpoint or from a Canadian standpoint overall. Now, what happens with the Nations League? Is it worth it? I think the way that CONCACAF has structured things, it is essentially said, Canada and the US, you guys are too good for this. That's how, if you look at their structure, that's what happens. Canada and the US were automatically given buys all the way to the end of CONCACAF W, just to the group stage. And in this current format, the Olympic qualifiers get automatic passage through to the Women's Gold Cup, which means the US is there and Canada versus Jamaica, based off of recent history, that's probably going to be Canada. You've built in ways to give those teams buys all the way to the champions. Now, does that help? It does in a sense, but then it also does create a little bit of inefficiencies. If you don't have European teams to play, especially if you're in Canada, your friendly pool is essentially limited to South America, Africa, and Asia. South America, a little bit easier to use from a travel standpoint, but still a little bit difficult because with no European countries, you are limited in terms of, especially having European camps, things like the Otto Clark Cup, for example. It may come back, but also it may be tougher to get into those. Those may be their only chances to play teams. So getting to tournaments that are out of European, or getting to European tournaments may be the option. But now that's one way of looking at it. But then the other thing is looking at it from the CONCACAF standpoint. If you put Canada and the US into these groups, you don't give them buys. Aren't you essentially dooming one group already? I mean, there's enough talent difference between Canada and the US with some of the other teams here that if you put them in the group, you're essentially dooming that group. Now, the flip side to that is you don't really know how good you are unless you test yourself against good teams. So maybe that's an opportunity for some of those teams to see how far of a gap they need to close in that sense. But I mean, the same way, people will complain about European people. There's some also fans who will complain about England beating Andorra or someone in Europe like 10-11 nil. Meanwhile, Haiti put 20 goals on the board in CONCACAF W qualifiers just because they could. So you're going to have those inefficiencies in terms of teams one way or the other. The question though comes what's the best way to solve that, right? Because I to a degree, I do feel that if you're going to do it, you need all the teams involved. But is there a way that you can do that without essentially making it a foregone conclusion? That doesn't mean that you skew it this way, maybe that's the federation making a choice because they want to value a couple things. And I think that's something we're going to get into as we go on in this conversation. But I think it's definitely something that you have to take into consideration, because if you just go one way or the other, you're essentially just left with, if the US is in a group with any country, it's essentially, well, we're happy to be here, but we're not moving on. Or is it? I mean, let's think about that. Is the way that they're structuring this good? And we're coming back to this question. I don't know. The way it's structured essentially says, like we said, Canada, US, you guys are too good for this. But at the same time, is a Nations League what they need? You definitely need more matchups. You definitely need more opportunities to play. And yes, playing like competition would be ideal. But would it benefit Canada to have a team in a Nations League type format? Potentially. I floated this out on Twitter earlier and said maybe if they do go full scale, maybe you get, now this requires the federation to actually be forward thinking and to plan for this, but you maybe create a U25, U23 type team and you put them into this tournament while also letting your senior team either get breaks or try to find matchups, which means multiple teams. Yes, it may mean that you are setting teams aren't your best at tournaments, but it's giving you opportunities to let players get run. As a federation, it's giving you opportunities to maybe cap tie a few players, but also it keeps them within the system and the program, because on the Canadian national team, there are limits and issues, especially from the standpoint of if they are going pro early, they're already there. But once they are finished their education, usually collegiate in the States, what opportunities do they have to play? We're still waiting for a domestic league, or maybe a U23, a U25 team keeps players within the actual system a little bit longer, which means we get more eyes on them, and maybe that gives them the opportunity, to play and get more through there. It also means you have to broaden that creativity of who you play. I for one welcome more trips to South America, or trips to Africa, or trips to Asia. Trips to Asia will probably be the most intriguing aspect of playing teams from friendlies. It does provide a bit of a travel hiccup. Not that travel is impossible, but sending everyone from different locations to Australia, as we saw, we couldn't really fly the team together, versus seeing what you could do. And a short trip from France or England to Spain or Germany is a lot more conducive to people in Europe than, say, boarding a flight from Paris to Shanghai, or Paris to Korea, then Korea to Australia. You gotta factor those aspects in. But I don't know, man. Just spitballing ideas at this point. What do you think? Does the Nations League concept help teams like Canada and the US? Especially with UEFA going to theirs, which means you won't have as many options in terms of friendlies available. Would it benefit Canada and the US to maybe be involved in a pure thing, but maybe use it as an opportunity to get young players more playing time, while not necessarily moving away from your veterans, but giving your veterans time to either rest or even seeing other friendlies versus other nations, So essentially having we see this in Africa, especially with the Championship of African Football. You'll have a senior team, you'll have a domestic team, then you have a U23, U21s, U19s, U17 teams, moving like that. Maybe those are opportunities. I don't know, guys. You let me know what you think. Leave your comments below.